Welcome to BYJU'S Exam Prep IAS and a very warm welcome to our weekly review of international events where we try to communicate to you whatever is the most important development or developments on international arena, how they affect our national interest, how our foreign policy should respond to them, and how the power equations between big powers, great powers are changing. And this time we have a very eventful review for you. The Speaker of the House of Representatives, Nancy Pelosi, had declared some time back that she would, as a part of her Asia tour, visit Taiwan. And this had created a lot of tension. The Chinese had warned that this would be considered as a hostile act. This would be a breach of the assurances of normal relations which America had given to them. This would be infringing the American recognition of one China policy, etc. But it was problematic because Nancy Pelosi represented the legislature in America. She could not be dictated about what she should be doing on her foreign tours, either by Pentagon, executive wing, or even the president. In any event, the tour did take place, but the tensions had arisen even before that. So we want to discuss with you what is the significance of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan, and in a broader context, her trip to Asia, East Asia. Interestingly, she is herself almost as old as President Biden. She is 82 years old. So she couldn't be undertaking these visits with an eye on the 2024 presidential elections. She probably is more worried about her legacy, and she is referred to as an old witch by the Chinese for her past performances during her visits to China. So we shall cover all this, but we shall do this properly in the proper historical context. Another event which struck the world was the assassination or execution of al-Zawahiri, the second in command when Osama bin Laden was alive of the Al-Qaeda. And after him, some people thought he was the senior-most leader of Al-Qaeda. He had been on the run. He was considered to be the mastermind of 9/11. He had taken refuge in Kabul. But interestingly, he was killed in a safe house, almost reminiscent of the attack which the Navy SEALs had done during President Obama's tenure to execute and eliminate Osama bin Laden from a safe house in Abbottabad near in a cantonment in Pakistan. It raises very many issues. It raises issues about the future of Al-Qaeda. It raises issues about the relationship between Al-Qaeda and Taliban in Afghanistan. It raises issues about the future of Afghanistan, what kind of uncertainty would be there. And of course, there have been a round of negotiations between the Afghan Taliban and one step removed the Americans somewhere indirectly about how to provide humanitarian relief to Afghanistan. So all this seems to be being jeopardized at the moment. These two were the major events which have a direct bearing on India's interest both in East Asia and in South Asia, in West Asia as well. There were other incidents we shall talk about. There was a high-ranking general who was killed in a helicopter crash, and it raised issues. It was because the accident site was in Baluchistan. Was it enemy action? Was it bad weather? What is bad planning to have senior officers in the helicopter surveying a flood relief operation? Did it require them to be there? And also the Pakistani Prime Minister has been sidelined, and top-ranking generals have been talking to negotiate the bailout for Pakistan from IMF to the Americans and to the Chinese. So does it mean that the Pakistani army has stepped up front? And what does this Af-Pak relationship mean for politics in South Asia? And the continuous economic trouble and travails of Sri Lanka and in Nepal, and what do they mean for India? We shall discuss this and more. Before we analyze for you the significance of Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and her extended tour to other East Asian countries, allies of the United States of America, I think it is necessary to look back in history a little and try to understand what Taiwan is, what its significance is. Now, Taiwan is a large island, some 26,000 square kilometers in area, with a population of a little over 23 million people, to the south of the mainland of People's Republic of China. Now, Obviously, the Chinese have always maintained that it is an integral part of China. It has always been an integral part of China. It is inalienable and they have sovereign rights over it. But if you look at recent history, the Chinese claims are not always verified by historical facts. If you go back to the 19th century, in 1815, on this island of Taiwan, which is occasionally also referred to, in past it was referred to as Formosa, the territory directly under Chinese control, Chinese administration, was less than 45-46% of the total area on the periphery of the region which faces China. The rest of the country was under the control of traditional aboriginal chiefdoms. But let's forget about as early as that. Let's not get back 225 years back. Let's see, even if we come towards the end of the 19th century, the last decade, the Chinese had lost the control of this island to Japan after a disastrous defeat in a war, and the treaty rights were given to Japan, and Japan used to exercise its power as a colony over Taiwan between 1895 till 1911, legitimately, legalistically, juristically recognized by all other colonial powers, but even after that, de facto. Because although there was a nationalistic revolution led by Chiang Kai-shek, before that by Sun Yat-sen, Chiang Kai-shek was a successor, but they could not control and take back from Japan the island of Taiwan. Japan yielded this island back to its allies only after its defeat in 1945 in the Second World War, and then it was interesting because then the situation was so fluid that there was a big civil war raging in China, and the priority for Mao Zedong was to capture as much land mass on mainland China, capture Nanking, capture Chongqing, capture Beijing, and then lay claims to the other territories which it did not have there in the mainland, Hong Kong, Macau, Taiwan. In the process, what had happened was when Japan was defeated and the US had regained control of Taiwan, they handed it over to Chiang Kai-shek, who had been an ally of theirs during the Second World War. But by 1949, it was transparently clear to everybody that Chiang Kai-shek would never get back to mainland China. He had to escape from that place to avoid persecution and punishment by the communists, and he, with the 2.3 million soldiers, ended up in Taiwan. So this, throughout the Cold War period, in the 50s and 60s and mid-70s, this territory was referred to as the nationalist China as contrasted to the People's Republic of China, which the communists controlled. Chinese continuously claimed that this was their territory, it had to be handed back to them, it should be reunited with the mainland China. But the Americans supported the Taiwanese. They gave them the permanent seat in the Security Council allotted to China. And even India, which had problems with the People's Republic of China with its liberation in Tibet, but it valued the People's Republic of China for whatever reasons Nehru thought was more important than the vital Indian national interest in security, etc. And did concede the point that both in Tibet and in Taiwan, Chinese sovereignty, if not sovereignty, sovereignty had to be respected. It subscribed to the One China model. This continued till 1979, but when Henry Kissinger and Nixon visited Mao Zedong, as people say they kowtowed to him, they again came across a more modus vivendi. They agreed that the concept of One China is agreed to in principle by the Americans, by the USA. But herein lies the fly in the ointment. The ambiguity continued. They said that what we have agreed upon is that the China would not take back Taiwan forcibly. The seat allotted to Taiwan in Security Councils was withdrawn and given to People's Republic of China, and slowly the other countries started withdrawing their diplomatic recognition from Taiwan. As things stand today, just about a dozen small countries recognize Taiwan as a sovereign nation separate from People's Republic of China, and these small countries are mostly microscopic islands in the South Pacific Ocean, or smaller countries beholden to China totally under their patronage, and they are their sort of proteges. But again, the interesting part is this, that despite all this ostracization, Taiwan has flourished. It ranks 21st in the largest economies in the world, is a technological powerhouse, It is the largest producer of advanced semiconductors in the world. Not only Japan and America, but even People's Republic of China depend on these. Let's also look at some other interesting ironical facts. The largest trading partner in international trade for Taiwan is China, and China has an extremely interesting adverse balance of trade with Taiwan because of this dependence on advanced semiconductors, that it is close to US dollars 2 billion that the trade imbalance is, and the total scale of the trade is much over hundreds of billions of dollars. So China has kept its umbilical economic cord intact despite its bristling muscles, despite browbeating, despite boasting vis-a-vis Taiwan. Now, things have changed ever since China, people say annexed, but I think this is a wrong word, because even the British recognized that the Hong Kong was held by them on lease. So when the lease ended, the Chinese took back Hong Kong, and they promised to have one state, two systems model, but this promise was not kept. China's argument is that the West was trying to destabilize the rest of mainland China by using Hong Kong as a hotspot to infiltrate, to subvert the Chinese system, but the suppression of the democratic movement, suppression of human rights in Hong Kong has given birth to apprehensions that China might do something similar to Taiwan when it thinks the conditions are right. Now, the stakes in Taiwan are very high. And what made the crisis more immediate was that ever since the Russians started their special operation in Ukraine, people have been speculating that can China, encouraged by the impotence of the rest of the Western world to check the ambitions of Kremlin, its misadventures in Crimea and subsequently in rest of Ukraine, can China do the same in a much more distant area like Taiwan? Before we proceed any further, we should also perhaps evaluate the strategic significance of Taiwan. The Straits of Taiwan, which Taiwan claims are part of its territorial waters, are the main maritime route for navigation, for big ships, for oil tankers, warships included, to North China Sea, to Yellow Sea, to the Sea of Japan, and a gateway to the further on the Pacific Ocean. If the Chinese control this, they control practically from the north to South China Sea to the southernmost parts of the Indian Ocean. Probably they can interfere with freedom of navigation. As far as China is concerned, their argument is very clear. Taiwan belongs to them. So Taiwan cannot possibly have claims to sovereignty and a separate territorial waters. Whatever territorial waters are there are within either the territorial waters of People's Republic of China or fall within its exclusive economic zone. Now, this leads to a very interesting situation, because there is also, as a bitter legacy of the Second World War, the Senkaku group of islands, on which again there is a dispute between China and Japan, and much further up north between Kuril Islands, which is Japan and the Russians. Now, the interesting part is this, that in the history of Japanese imperialism, the Korean Peninsula, Senkaku Islands, Taiwan, all seem to be, in recent modern Japanese history, part of the Japanese empire. Now, they have now been claimed by People's Republic of China as, well, a part of the Chinese imperial domain, so to which the communists are successors, and they do not believe in autonomy or separation of these. Like, you could say that Tibet is an autonomous region, but its autonomy is not even a fig leaf. Same about Hong Kong, same about Taiwan, the future, what holds for if it rejoins the People's Republic of China. Now, all these issues become very important since Americans have withdrawn from Afghanistan, and there is a great fear in the minds, apprehension in the minds of its allies, that if Chinese use either its protege, cat's paw, North Korea, or use their own move their own muscles, the Japanese and the South Koreans would be threatened by the Chinese domination, and Americans may not be in a position to come to their aid. So, to make a presence, to show that they can project their power, Americans have to keep their warships, aircraft carriers, very large aircraft carriers, and the support vessels of the Navy in these waters. But if now we come to the Pelosi visit. Because the Pelosi visits has provoked the Chinese have effectively imposed a blockade around the island of Taiwan. There are 6 crucial choke points where the Chinese have already said that they have placed their warships, and they have warned the international navigation people that nobody should either overfly the island, nobody should cross these territorial, because they are having live military exercises. Now, live military exercises means that live weapons are being fired. Some of these missiles are flying over the island of Taiwan. Some of them have landed in Japan's territorial waters, and a minutest mistake can lead to a horrible tragedy where a war by accident can flare out among these. So it is not only that the Taiwanese scramble their air force, Taiwanese send their naval ships in the territorial waters, the Japanese have to worry about their protection. And Japan continues to house American air bases. Throughout these provocative actions in the aftermath of Pelosi's visit in Taiwan, the Americans have shown some restraint. Not a single plane has stirred out, even for routine exercises, out of the Okinawa air base. But there have been missiles overflying Taiwan, and there has been a sudden curb on navigation, freedom of navigation in this region. Now, the stakes for both parties are very high. President Biden cannot appear as a man who is so weak that who could not stop Pelosi from visiting Taiwan, and when Pelosi's visit created tremors, he has been unable to control the pushback by the Chinese. The Chinese may decide to loosen the blockade, but if they continue the blockade, it is going to affect the maritime interest of Japan and South Korea. Now, they will also have to rethink how serious Americans are about their plans, about Quads, about their AUKUS, and so on. The interesting thing is this: the stakes are equally high for Xi Jinping. Xi Jinping, after a couple of months, is going to face a Chinese Communist Party meeting where he is bidding to receive a third term in power, unprecedented, which practically will make him a president for the lifetime of the People's Republic of China, and he wants to reinforce his position in the Hall of Fame with Mao Zedong and Deng Xiaoping. But if he does not retaliate and teach, because the boasts of China were very strong, they're fire and brimstone. The Chinese foreign minister said, even Xi Jinping echoed the same words when they said that if the Americans play with fire, they better watch out because fire can only burn them. Now, the problem is that you say if you cross this red line, we will not let you rest in peace. But as the world has seen, several red lines are crossed, several final ultimatums pass, and diplomacy seems to save the day, at least from the brink, at various times. We have seen that we are almost at the completion of the 6th month of prolonged conflict in Ukraine. Several red lines, several threats have been posed, violated, people have held back. But will this happen in Taiwan? Or will the Chinese realize that this is the best opportunity for them to reintegrate and reunite Taiwan with them? But the cost can be very high. While Xi Jinping cannot appear as a weak leader who could not retaliate to America when they violated assurances and Pelosi did visit Taiwan, but China depends to a very large extent on its economic development, economic progress, on the trade it does with the Western world, even with America. We talked about advanced semiconductors in Taiwan. So China has imposed a blockade on Taiwan. They have stopped importing food stuff from them. They have stopped importing timber from them. They have stopped various other items, but they have not imposed a ban on semiconductors, because if it is done, it will disturb the already traumatized Chinese supply line, and the Chinese would have to worry far more than the Russians have had to worry because of the gas supplies to the Western Europe, to countries like Germany. Because you see, the Russians know that they have been suffering from the economic sanctions from America for 6 years and preparing for it. They had never been so beautifully integrated with the Western economies as the Chinese have been. So while the Western countries would find it difficult to disentangle from China, the Chinese economic prosperity and the rate of growth, which has been affected badly after its some say short-sighted zero tolerance policy of COVID and recurrence of COVID. So will China risk all this and just for the image of Xi Jinping remains to be seen. Where does that leave India? For India, the issue is very interesting. When the Indian foreign minister in an ASEAN meeting meets and talks to Blinken, the US Foreign Secretary of State, the Chinese walk out. So they are showing their displeasure. There are two views on this, that some people say that China has also put India so much under its debt because of not direct investment, but its balance of trade with India, that India cannot afford to jeopardize this trade relationship because of tensions either in South China Sea or on the disputed Himalayan border. Talking of this, let's see that even in Taiwan and China, the relationship is very adverse. The Chinese investment in Taiwan is very little, but the Taiwanese investment in mainland China is over $200 billion and things of that kind. So the point is that Chinese are quite willing to risk their economic relationship with Taiwan because they know it is only temporary. Once the reunification takes place, either peacefully or forcibly, the world will have to put up with it. The Americans have been trying to protect their interests by saying that the Taiwanese should set up their advanced semiconductor plants in America to save them from sudden capture by the Chinese, and then the Chinese would not have to depend on the American sanctions, etc., etc. But where does leave India? The Indians also do not recognize the Taiwanese government. They also believe, like America, in one China principle, but they also have a lively relationship because of the advanced technology of Taiwan with Taiwan under the different garb of a trade legation, etc. So some people say that Taiwanese, a small country compared to India, has still had the nerves and the gall to take on the Chinese and not succumb under pressure. Will India do that, or has India been conveying mixed signals to Chinese? We try to be polite, we try to have high-level visits, and the Chinese can show their displeasure, walk out, make insulting comments about India hosting His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and we think that the rounds of peaceful negotiations taking place in Galwan will sort out the material at all. So there is this question mark, and has the India's policy toward China in long term or short term been calibrated in light of what is happening in the world elsewhere, the war in Ukraine and Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan and the rest of East Asia? India was supposed to be an integral part of Quads, but Indians tried to underplay it. But now it may be too late to say that we are countervailing China, and what amount of displeasure of China can we afford to withstand and take. For domestic political reasons, the government may not agree or admit the seriousness of the problem, but I think we are on the cusp of another serious strategic political showdown with China, and to our considered view, the crisis triggered by Pelosi's visit to Taiwan is far more important than the war in Ukraine, because that involves primarily the European countries. This actually involves the US, involves its allies Japan and South Korea, it involves South Asian countries, it involves Australia, it involves the ASEAN countries. And all of them have relationships with China which are full of inner contradictions. So we don't have to worry about everybody else, but we have to worry about our relationship with China in the aftermath of this visit and the instability this has caused. The action which took place in Afghanistan was indeed very dramatic. The American President Biden, who was convalescing from another bout of COVID in a safe house, had self-quarantined himself, announced to the world that the Americans had exterminated, had eliminated, which is another euphemistic word for executed, al-Zawahiri, the senior-most leader of Al-Qaeda, who had been very close and second in command at the time of Osama bin Laden when he was alive. He was supposed to be a mastermind of the 9/11. Osama bin Laden was, of course, eliminated, exterminated, terminated with extreme prejudice, use whatever term you use, during President Obama's presidency, when the American SEALs had landed and in a daredevil operation killed him in a safe house in Pakistan in a cantonment in Abbottabad. There seem to be striking similarities in this. In this case also, al-Zawahiri was killed in a safe house within protected area where major embassies used to be there in Kabul, Afghanistan. It has raised some very interesting questions. It has allowed President Biden to say, when he was withdrawing from Afghanistan almost a year back, that America may withdraw from the ground. It may remove the boots from the earth of Afghanistan, but it would retain the capacity to protect its interests by mounting an attack across the horizon and eliminating an individual or a group of individuals, terrorists, without causing collateral damage to civilians. Now, this claim has been made in past also, when the Americans were evacuating their allies and supporters from Afghanistan, but those claims were not entirely true. There were civilian damages, there were civilian kids had been killed, but that was collateral damage which the Americans then claimed could not be avoided. Another interesting thing is that several times in past decades and a half, the claim has been made that al-Zawahiri has been killed, and al-Zawahiri suddenly comes back again with a video recording alive. But this time it seems that the American president must have reassured himself, either through DNA analysis or whatever other evidence is there, to make a statement that Zawahiri has been eliminated. It raises 3 or 4 sets of very interesting questions. Did the Americans know of al-Zawahiri's presence? Were they informed by a source, a mole within the Taliban? Was the intelligence shared by Pakistan with the Americans? Or a faction of Taliban itself carried on some kind of a complicity in this thing? The way the Zawahiri was executed was very interesting. It was a hellfire missile launched from a drone, pilotless drone, which opened its blades and beheaded the person, precisely targeting him when allegedly this man was taking his evening rest on the balcony of his safe house. The safe house was owned by one of the Haqqanis, and the Haqqani clan has been on the inside track with the Afghans. They have very close ties with the Pakistani ISI, and the interim internal security minister is a Haqqani in Taliban. Now, the interesting thing which we have to keep in mind is this, that does it indicate that there is a faction fight within the Taliban in Afghanistan? Do they consider their enemies as Al-Qaeda or splinter groups of Al-Qaeda? Again, Al-Qaeda has splintered after Osama bin Laden into several groups, from Al-Shabaab to Boko Haram in Africa to keep changing their names. And you have Islamic Emirate of the Khorasan province, which is supposed to be looking after Afghanistan, bits of Kashmir and the rest of South Asia. So, or is this a very interesting ploy that they show that they are different splinters, but then they can merge like amoeba, like puddles of water. When time comes, they can join hands, then they can split like drops of mercury, and it is very difficult to decide what is happening. There also have been fights between the people belonging to the Islamic Emirate of Khorasan province and the Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. Within the Taliban, it is well known there are Talibans. Well, there are no moderate Talibans, there are no good Talibans. We have learnt it over a year. But there are some Taliban which are dependent, which look forward to their funds being defreezed by the Americans. They are looking forward to humanitarian relief from America to cope up with the famine-like situation. And there are those who don't want to make any compromises at all. So are we on the verge of a faction fight behind the scenes in Kabul, Afghanistan? But the saddest part is that it's almost a year since the Taliban took power in Afghanistan. They have not kept any one of their promises. The government is not inclusive or representative. The rights of women are being very rudely, crudely violated. There is a certain barbaric punishment which is being meted out. Minorities like Shias and others have been persecuted, and even the Sikhs, which had lived reasonably uneasy, tense, but had provided humanitarian reliefs in their gurdwaras and langars, are being forced to leave Afghanistan slowly. So the Afghanistan has been carved out into the zones of warlords who are conducting as usual, business as usual, growing narcotics, smuggling arms, and all this, the international borders can be not always, the porous borders with Pakistan or Iran cannot always be looked after as as a barbed, fenced, totally protected, sealed out border. So India has to worry about this. What makes India a little concerned is that the Americans may be in a position to eliminate who they considered their enemy in another country's territory and get away with it. But can Indians have a confidence that their vital interests can be protected by promises or commitments given either by the Afghan government at the moment, whom India doesn't recognize, but has made it clear that will be willing to provide generous assistance for humanitarian relief. They have declared that they are going to reopen their embassy in Kabul. But are these only symbolic gestures, or can India expect a genuine commitment from Taliban while this is happening? So the pitch, as they say in English, has been queered because of the assassination of al-Zawahiri. Now, al-Zawahiri was a very interesting person. He was a medical doctor who is in his student days joined the Muslim Brotherhood. He's an Egyptian. And again, this nationality of a leader of an Islamic terrorist quote-unquote organization is interesting. Do the Saudis still continue to pull the strings from behind? Is there a change in heart is there again a similar kind of a, if not change in heart, a difference of opinion among different generations of those who belong to Muslim Brotherhood? How their participation in the Al-Qaeda operations has given them different kind of experiences, and the whole experience when the IS was the principal enemy and everybody else seems to be the lesser enemy, those days are gone. So how does India react to this situation? Another incident which forces us to think about this is that Americans will probably continue to now go back to a formulation of an AFPAC. In their strategic thinking, Afghanistan and Pakistan are conjoined twins. They should not be separated. Indians for a long time had thought that the Americans were dehyphenating Afghanistan and Pakistan. They were not treating Pakistan and India in parity and giving certain weightage to India because they thought that Indians were valuable to them for countervailing China in the South China Sea. That's why the Quads. But AUKUS has put paid to that thesis that the Americans value Indians strategically as much as they do their other allies elsewhere. It is almost impossible to believe that the Americans would give up on Pakistanis and rely on India, because Pakistan continues to be important strategically for them for access to Afghanistan, the soft underbelly of the Russians. So this is one part of the diplomatic discussion. The second incident which took place was that in a helicopter crash in Baluchistan, a very high-ranking Lieutenant General of Pakistan in charge of the Corps Command there died. Ostensibly, he was supervising flood relief operations. Now, interestingly, Baluchistan is a hot spot in Pakistan where the Baluch rebels have in past killed Chinese advisors, carried out insurgent terrorist attacks, and there is speculation that there might have been some kind of an insurgent terrorist activity to knock down this helicopter. We will never know. These are all conspiracy theories, but the point is that there is instability in Pakistan, in Karachi, in Sindh, in Baluchistan, in Northwest Frontier Province, which is adjacent to Afghanistan, and all this is bound to have a spillover effect in to Indian territory into our security, whether it is contraband trade in drugs, whether it is radicalization of youth, whether it is spillover of activities to prove that because something has happened in Afghanistan over which they did not have any control, so would they like to trigger off an incident somewhere else and say we are capable of doing this elsewhere? So we'll have to keep a very close look at whatever is happening in Afghanistan and Pakistan. While all this has been happening in the North China Sea, in Taiwan, in Straits of Taiwan, in Afghanistan, other things, we have taken our eyes off the ball, as they say. The transfer of power in Sri Lanka has taken place almost peacefully, tranquilly, and the protests have ended. But the crisis has not ended. The new president appointed the prime minister of his choice. The Indian government has wished them well, but the fact remains that both of them belong to ancient regime. Both of them belong to a system whose loyalties, not Ranil Wickremesinghe's, but the Prime Minister's identification with the Rajpaksa political factions has been very clear. The President has also confessed that there is no way Sri Lanka can come out of the mess in less than a year, year and a half, and no progress virtually has been made with in negotiations with the International Monetary Fund. Reassuring noises have been made to placate the Sri Lankan citizens, but the fact remains that the queues of the fuel continue, power cuts continue, shortages of life-saving medicines continue, schools have been reopened, but one doesn't know how the economy is going to take shape. The offices, are they working regularly or not? How can the factories work without that? There was a little alarm when a Chinese ship was berthing in a port in Sri Lanka. Of course, India expressed its concern, and the Sri Lankan president immediately responded by saying that we have all friends, no military use will be allowed to any ship, etc. But the fact remains that will Ranil Wickremesinghe be in a position to get a deal from IMF which the people of Sri Lanka accept? Because the moment he accepts the conditionalities, the taxes, the tightening of the belt, it is virtually the last straw on the back of the camel in Sri Lanka. And the Sri Lankan president has admitted, thankfully acknowledged the assistance given by India, but it cannot be, Indians cannot continue giving a dole to Sri Lanka. They can bail them out temporarily from a crisis, but from a crisis to crisis, they have tried to get similar aid from China, but China probably is not too willing in the changed circumstances, because part of the ire of the Sri Lankan people against the Rajpaksa family was that they were considered to be puppets and proteges of the Chinese. So while the Chinese would like to protect their investment and recover some of it, they do realize that it is not the best moment for them to be active in Sri Lanka. This doesn't mean that the space is vacant for India to get active, because India should not, once again, it knows from past, get embroiled in the domestic politics of a country and get involved in economic recovery of a country which it cannot afford to do entirely on its own. There has to be an international consortium, and India could take a lead in organizing this kind of thing, but primarily at the moment this is a matter between Sri Lanka and the IMF. And as soon as it takes place, although we don't see any signs of doing that, then there might be restlessness, there might be protests again, and what would happen is open to question. Similar things are happening in Pakistan. Now, Pakistan is looked after both by China and the United States of America and its Islamic friends, so it can reschedule, rejuggle its debts, and already it has received an assurance of $6 billion to temporarily tide it over from the IMF. The interesting thing which has happened in this negotiation is that the Prime Minister is nowhere in the picture. I mean, although they can keep blaming Imran Khan for the mess, the present Prime Minister is not visible, the present Foreign Minister is totally lacking in experience and gravitas, and senior Pakistani generals are negotiating the economic bailout with the IMF or negotiating with China. So are we witnessing a scene where the people to engage with is not the civilian government in Pakistan, but to engage with generals directly or indirectly when we are looking forward to our own interests? The same kind of a situation India might be confronting in Nepal, because we again, you know, what happens is that we focus on one crisis. Understandably, the crisis in Taiwan was much more important. The situation in Afghanistan is far more volatile, but simmering discontent in Nepal, the continued constitutional crisis, more than either, the mess the economy is in. And Nepal again is a landlocked country. Nepal again is very heavily dependent on its relationship with India. But at the same time, if it keeps asserting its independence, things are going to be not very easy to manage the relationship. When the government of India declared the Agnivir Agnipath scheme in India, the Nepalese were very concerned that it would directly impact the recruitment of Gorkhas in the Gorkha regiments in the Indian army. And it is an important source of foreign exchange and remittances to the Nepalese government. But at the same time, the Nepalese economy depends to a very large extent on tourism. And like Sri Lanka, they have taken a big hit. There also have been unfortunate accidents of small planes catering to the revival of tourism in Nepal, which again are linked to the corruption in certification of airworthiness of planes, certain circuits which are being forcibly reopened in a hurry without adequate preparation to earn revenue. But a couple of accidents like this, and the tourism industry might again go on a very dangerous slide back. So India has to keep a close watch on the economic developments, to my mind, far more important than the constitutional development. They are interrelated though, but the economic development in Nepal, economic developments in Nepal, state of economy in Nepal, we should have a close watch on without either giving gratuitous advice or overcommitting ourselves. That is all we have for you this time. A quick recap. I think what Nancy Pelosi's visit to Taiwan has taught us is two things. A, that a small political entity, not an independent country, not a sovereign state recognized by most of the world, can stand up to a big, far more powerful bully and assert its independence. So there is no reason why a country which is the second most populous nation in the world, very soon going to become the most populous nation in the world, technologically powerful, aspiring to be the third largest economy within foreseeable future. It already is between fifth and sixth. Why should it not assert itself when it has a confrontation with China? Why should it be so diffident about its economy being smaller, its economy being dependent on the trade relationship with China? Why should it be always polite and courteous and saying that we are a largest democracy, we are democratic, we are rule-bound, and not push back? That is one part. The second part is that important lesson of what we reviewed this time is in our neighborhood, we cannot afford to take our eyes off our adjacent neighbors, whether it is Pakistan or, as we said earlier, the Af-Pak is a hyphenated relationship with us. When the rest of the world, Chinese and the Americans, look at Afghanistan and Pakistan as a composite, and whatever happens in Afghanistan is a spillover in Pakistan, and Pakistan has a finger in every pie in Afghanistan, and whatever seems to happen, including the assassination of al-Zawahiri, the unanswered questions say that the Americans and the Pakistanis and some factions in the Taliban and the moles in Kabul are still working in coordinated manner. This doesn't mean that this coordination is in favor for India. Nothing has changed as far as India is concerned about the ferocity of the Taliban, its fundamental Islamic nature, and whether there's a paternalistic society, whether it's a feudal society, whether it's a medieval society, whether it's a cruel society, a barbaric enforcement of primordial laws, it is against women, is against education, is against modernity. But the fact is that nothing is going to change, and India will still have to live with Afghanistan and Pakistan and its immediate neighborhood. The other neighbors, Sri Lanka and Nepal, seem to be in the throes of economic crisis, out of which they are not going to come out easily. It will be tempting for India to promise aid, jump it in, give advice. India should probably worry more about the state of its own economy, and probably a neighbors next door, Bangladesh and Bhutan, with whom we have a more tranquil relationship before we get involved into everything all around us. But India will have to assert itself to countervail China in the ASEAN region and in the South Asian region. There is no question of not choosing to do so. We cannot be watching and waiting all the time. We don't have to jump in, but we have to be prepared for any untoward development which adversely affects our interests. Till we meet again, thank you and goodbye.